Today on the show, we discuss how Clovis Bray helped make the golden age of mankind possible by being both a brilliant scientist and a narcissistic jerk. Welcome to Lore Party, the podcast that explores the stories, characters, and universes behind some of our favorite video games. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor.
So, this is our first Destiny episode. I'm super pumped for this.
We're standing at the edge of something great, I feel. This is the beginning of a new era.
You're sounding like Clovis Bray.
We're so close to
cracking
the code, Kevin, of immortality.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, so today, guys, we're going to talk about Clovis Bray. Probably, he's a very well-known figure in the Destiny universe, but he's also a pretty hot topic right now with the new expansion Beyond Light.
Yeah, even if you played like the original release, Vanilla Destiny, way back in the day, you heard his name a few times. He's been around. You've definitely heard of him.
Yeah, you've definitely heard of him, and you've probably seen the Bray Tech symbol all over the place.
And chances are you've directly benefited from his handiwork, especially if you play as an Exo character in Destiny.
Yeah. We're going to go over Clovis Bray real quick, just kind of who this guy is, like what is he, what's his story, because really this is very important to understand what he did and how literally everything he's done has impacted the Destiny universe in some way.
For better or worse, mostly worse.
Yeah,
you could argue, I guess.
You go. Yeah, we're going to be talking about a lot about like the morals of what he did and just kind of discuss this super rich asshole. Mm-hmm. That's basically what he is.
Yeah, let's go.
So who's Clovis Bray? So Clovis Bray, he can kind of be considered the most, in air quotes, successful Golden Age scientist in like all of Destiny. Mm-hmm. Clovis so he has a whole family, and they're called like the Bray clan and all that. Clovis Bray, the first, that's the guy we're going to be talking about. He created Bray Corporation. So Bray Corporation is this, think like the SpaceX or like Amazon or something.
Sure.
Think like this massive corporation in the Destiny universe.
Big deal. Very much so.
And I'm talking like, yeah, dude, they created almost everything we interact with that kind of makes the Destiny universe the Destiny universe.
Exactly.
So I'll list off a couple of things. So for one, most notable inventions, the Exo. I mean, if you played at Destiny, you know what an Exo is. If you know who Cade 6 is, you know what an Exo is.
It's basically an entire subspecies of humanity that Bray Corporation created. I mean, that's never been done before. It's crazy.
Yeah. Think robot people, but not AI.
Right.
If you will.
Sentient androids, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So Exos are probably the most well-known thing this guy has made. We're going to be talking a lot about Exos in this, so get ready. He also created SIVA. SIVA is the like nanotech, the stuff that the Iron Lords fought. So if you know what the Iron Lords are, if you ever played Iron Banner or whatever, that's what it is. It's the nanotech.
SIVA was originally intended to operate as sort of a terraforming device almost, or it was one of the many tools that humans of the Golden Age came up with to make living outside of Earth more possible, like on space stations, on the moon, on Venus. It was a very useful, very flexible, very versatile, and extremely powerful technology.
I would say almost everything this guy did in terms of achievements. Well, again, all this stuff is in air quotes because we're going to be talking about it like, what's successful here?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
What does that really mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, SIVA was this nanotechnology. And then engrams. I mean, everybody loves an engram.
Everybody loves
come
engrams.
on.
Like where all your cool stuff comes from engrams. Your exotic light machine guns, your high-level helmets and armor and stuff. It all comes from engrams. So you're welcome.
So, yeah, you're welcome for that. Braytech is, they know what's up.
And of course, the big guy himself, Rasputin the Warmind, who we've tangled with a few times. He's been sort of friend, sort of foe, but underneath all of it, Rasputin, the incredibly intelligent and sophisticated supercomputer.
Now, again, these are just like 4 notable things that this guy made. He made a lot of other stuff, but these are like the 4 big stuff, you know?
Yeah. These are the hits, the best of, the greatest hits. And it's important to note that Bray Corporation wasn't the only game in town, obviously. Like when the Traveler arrived and gifted, this paracausal technology, basically magic and the light, things like that to humanity, and the Golden Age began, there were a lot of big things happening. There was a lot of science going on. There was a lot of innovation going on. Clovis Bray just happened to be kind of the leader of the pack. So Bray Corporation, this is the stuff they did, like creating Exos, creating Siva, the Engrams, Rasputin. These are the things that set Bray Corporation apart from the competition. So if this is what they did, think of what their competitors did, like the Ishtar Collective and other corporations and groups. There were things like this were happening all the time in the Golden Age. So like this kind of stuff was it was still revolutionary, obviously, especially to us here in current times. But in the Golden Age, this kind of stuff happened a lot. But it was still like Clovis Bray was the man. He was the LeBron of science.
Oh God, no, I am not. No. Okay, no.
Sorry.
So then here's my question: what was this guy like?
Yeah.
Who was this guy as a person, Connor? Tell me right now, Mr. LeBron of. Oh God.
He was not. Okay, so he was not the kind of guy you'd want to have a beer with. By all accounts, Clovis Bray the First himself, as a person, as a human being, very complicated legacy. There's a lot of tales of extreme narcissism, like we touched on in the intro. We'll get really into detail about that, but first and foremost, you can't really argue the man was a genius. Obviously, a man of towering intellect. But as we'll get into here in the meat of this episode, the motivations behind his genius, the things that drove him towards the accomplishments that made him a legend of the Golden Age, they were at their core very, very selfish and driven by ego. So you do have to face the question when talking about Clovis Bray: was he really out to better mankind, or was it just kind of a massive ego trip for him?
Yeah, like there's no denying, this guy had definitely a hand in creating probably, I don't even say some, I think most of the the greatest scientific achievements of the Golden Age, and what we still use all this stuff today in the Destiny universe. But I know you wrote this down, his dedication to progress. It really, and I don't want to diagnose anybody here, I'm not a doctor, but yeah, it kind of borderlines narcissism's, sociopath. Like we'll get into the meat of it, but all of this stuff that he did came from a selfish place, not like a genuine desire to better humanity. It's more of a desire to better himself. Yeah,
it was kind of like, it was from a place of, it was self-glorification in a lot of ways, but also, as we'll get into soon, it was all of it. Every single step of the way was just a ladder toward his real goal, which was immortality. And that ties into his invention of the Exo, but we'll get into that next. But kind of a quick sidestep, when you're dealing with his legacy, like we talked about, it's a complicated legacy. A big reason for that is the fact that so many of his inventions had fallout and unintended consequences that, like you mentioned, Kevin, we still deal with today. Today meaning the current setting of the Destiny universe, which is hundreds upon hundreds of years after Clovis Bray invented all this stuff. There was the collapse and the age of the city and the age of the Guardians, which is where the game takes place. Even after all that time, we as Guardians, players of Destiny, we're still dealing with the ramifications of Siva, kind of being corrupted and going rogue, and the Vex infection of Europa, which we could get into also. So
all of this shit is still getting dealt with today.
Yeah, and it all traces back to Clovis Bray. Like, long story short, whether you're talking about Siva, Rasputin, the Vex on Europa, it all comes back to him. And, you could argue that at the time, what he was doing, he was inventing good things, useful things that people in the Golden Age, benefited from. But many, many centuries down the line, we as Guardians are still putting up with it. And that all has to be factored into Clovis Bray's legacy. Like, at the time, he was a genius and he did great things, but his inventions eventually soured and kind of went bad, and there's been monumental fallout for a long time as a result. But that's kind of the long and short of who Clovis Bray was and what he did. But yeah, we want to at this point dive a little deeper into his obsession. We're here to talk about Clovis Bray's obsession with immortality and how it motivated him to do the things he did during the Golden Age. And really, this obsession colors so much about his character.
Yeah. And it explains a lot of the reasoning behind a lot of the stuff he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, hell, we've got raids now about it. We have, how it's, the Exo are created and stuff. Like, this new expansion has kind of delved into and really explained a lot of stuff. And if you really pay attention, it also opens up a lot more lore and understanding of the universe.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. So yeah, let's get into it. This guy had one obsession: living forever. All he wanted to do was have eternal life. He could be considered probably, everything Clovis did was considered like a stepping stone to his like true goal, which is immortality. And, becoming rich, gaining access to technology that was, hidden to the public. For instance, Siva and the Warmind, like, that wasn't a public thing right away. Like, he was creating all this stuff not only to get rich, but he wanted to also use this tech. It was an excuse to use this technology to get to his goal.
Everything was a means to an end for him. There was no there's no intrinsic value of the work he was creating. Like, it wasn't because, this is good, this will be good for people. It was all just, this will help me get to immortality, and any benefit for other people was just a side effect. That was kind of beside the fact for him.
And he even used these side effects of like these benefits to, if you think about it, manipulate humanity to like, yeah, give me more money. I'll give this to you. Give me more money so it can help fund my further research. Because the biggest thing he did that he got to really work with was, of course, going towards his Exo end game, but working with the Vex. Working with captured Vex and, if you will, the Vex milk. That really messed him up. Working with the Vex, it kind of manipulated his mind and twisted him even further and almost emphasized the traits, all the negative traits, like his ego and his narcissism. It got worse, his narcissism and ego. It just kept going up.
Yeah. For anyone not aware, for the layman out there, the Vex are basically, you can't really call them robots. That's a gross, gross oversimplification, but suffice to say they are machinery made out of quantum mathematics, basically, and they come from alternate dimensions, and they're powered by a white milk-like fluid that most people just refer to as Vex milk. And so, like, just how weird they are on the face of them and, like, how alien they are to our consciousness and how we interpret the world. I don't think anyone could experiment on the Vex and stay sane. I'll just say that. Like,
no, I don't.
Least of all, Clovis Bray.
For all our Mass Effect people, think of it like the Geth, but
the
Geth were from almost every time and dimension.
Right.
It's insane. They have like this weird hive mind mentality, and this guy was with them the entire time, and they have a side effect on you, especially at this time, and it made him go nuts, basically. Yeah,
even more nuts than he already was. So it didn't help his isolate, because you already isolated himself from other people. I think that's something you see with a lot of genius figures throughout history, is that thing they deal with where they have a hard time relating to the people around them. Clovis Bray took that sort of aspect of genius and put it to the nth degree, and I think working with the Vex made that even worse. Like, you're too smart to have relationships with people, and if you're a genius who's only obsessed with living forever, the Vex basically existing not even forever because time is like a plaything to them, that would screw you up even worse, for sure.
And so my big thing on this was, even with when the Traveler showed up with its space magic, it gave longevity. Like, everybody's life kind of, I think it was like tripled or quadrupled or something. Even with this longevity, it wasn't enough. He was still obsessed with wanting more, and it just kind of fueled his greed for just more life. And this kind of made him sick, not just mentally, but physically. He did everything he could to try to stay alive. Like there's journal entries where he's saying how his organs are starting to fail, but he's doing stuff to trying to manipulate that to keep going, injecting himself with Vex milk and all this other crap.
Right.
And his mental instability, I mean, that ultimately manifests, if you think about it, in his like decaying body. And I think that also when he looks at the Traveler, everybody else saw the Traveler as this like, this deity machine, and they wanted to do things for it. And he saw it as a tool. He's like, okay, this thing showed up and I'm going to use it. And I think his relationship with the Traveler was one of, you are just another machine, just like the Vex. You are a tool. And okay, great. You gave me longevity. Great. Okay, my life is longer. I have more time.
Yeah, other people maybe who had more empathy or just self-awareness or, were a little more grounded, they just saw the Traveler as like a reminder that the universe is bigger than them and that like there's wonder in the world still, but not our man Clovis Bray. No, to him it was just, how do I make this about me? What does this mean for me? It was all him. So yeah, that it's every single new discovery. Like, I think you've made a great point so far. It's like every new discovery, every new accomplishment that Bray had and achieved, it was all just fuel for the fire. Like, I have to go further. I have to go harder. I'm not immortal yet. Like, this is great. What I've done is good, but it's not immortality. So it's not good enough.
It's not enough for me rather
Exactly.
than it's not enough for everybody else. And ultimately, I mean, he creates an exo body for himself and he basically roams the cosmos for a very long time. And then he also creates another exo body style. It's a giant floating head. He basically is he's Zordon. That's what he is. He's a giant exo floating head on Europa. So he splits himself into two, if you will. He has this head that's dormant on Europa. We'll get into that about talking about that, but he also creates this body. And I won't reveal who it is just yet.
We'll get to that. But we have met him. Let's just say that. You might know him already.
We've met him on our first day in the tower.
Right.
So he kind of gets his goal, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about ego, though, really quick. What kind of freak just turns himself into a giant floating robot head on Europa? Like, that's the biggest ego flex I've ever heard of. That's just, you want to go down as a legend to do that,
Just wait till you talk to him too. Like, you want to talk about, like, first you walk up, you're like, whoa, this is crazy. Wow, this is really like, I might as well be naming a building after my last name all over the planet. It's just my little, but no, I'm going to make myself into this giant floating head. And then when you talk to him, you're like, holy shit, I hate this guy. So let's get into the ethics of this.
Sure. Yeah. We have an ethical discussion to have about just, like, there are so many ethical questions to ponder about just what Clovis Bray did and whether or not it was worth it. And, we've gotten into his motivations here, but, and we've touched on, this first point here is that throughout all of his work, there was only one person in mind in all of Clovis Bray's work, and that was himself. As we've explained already, the Golden Age was an era of prosperity for all mankind, but a lot of that was because of, a newfound purpose. People were suddenly united by the Traveler. Like, oh, these things are possible now. We don't have to squabble here on Earth. We can reach out, walk in the void and settle on other planets. There was this great unification that happened, and people were cooperating. It was very communal. But Clovis Bray, the first, wasn't interested in any of that. It was all about himself.
He took advantage of everybody wanting to work together, and he broke a lot of just ethics. Like, the violations it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And he always seemed to come to this conclusion that, it's for the greater good. But really, in his head, he's saying, yeah, it's for the greater good for me.
It's for my greater good.
It's for my greater good. Like,
right.
He experiments on people to become exos. And he's justifying experimenting on a small group of people to save everyone. And that's the argument he put out to his violations of ethics in creating the exo. and I just to change the world and all this stuff, and I'm not one for that. I just
there's a lore party episode on the Doom games recently that deals with utilitarianism. You should totally check that out. But we should be clear about what exactly this experimentation in the process of inventing the Exo involved. Like, you say he experimented on people. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't that involve like rebooting sentient Exo people so many times that they like kind of lost their minds? And he was doing all of it just to figure out a way to prevent Exo minds from degrading and kind of being deranged and going insane. So he put people through this agonizing process of living in a machine body and having your memory wiped, and as soon as you regain your memories, you go crazy because you don't feel human anymore. He put a bunch of people through that and justified it, like you said, with the rationalization that, oh, I'm bettering mankind, but
and that's
really
the thing, like,
he's just pursuing immortality for himself.
The benefiting of humanity was like a side effect.
Right.
Or an afterthought. His main goal was always to make a name for himself because he was egotistical. He did still want to make a name for himself, but also pushing the boundaries of like possibility for himself to become immortal. That's all it really was. And his pursuit for immortality, it just shows that like no matter what he accomplished in his life, he just kept wanting more. He's just a greedy asshole. And it comes back to his like, you wrote this down, so I'm going to let you say it.
No, sure. Yeah. It comes when we talk about ethics. I've been watching a lot of The Good Place lately, so forgive me for this comparison. But the comparison is like you learn. I mean, when you're dealing with ethics, you examine motivations, and like people's reasons for doing things matter. If you're pursuing a scientific goal to help people, that's obviously noble. That's an ethical thing. But as we've dealt with, helping people was never the goal for Clovis Bray. It was all just to make himself live forever. Even that, it comes back to his motivation to never stop. Like, he's never satisfied. There's never an end point. It's just a constant drive toward the next experiment, the next breakthrough. There's maybe something to be said about the narcissistic tendency, or the sociopathic tendency even, to never be satisfied with what you have. Mm-hmm. Whether that's the relationships you have with family, other people in your life, or, you know, the works you do that help other people live better lives or longer lives or whatever. None of that is good enough for him, as we've explained. And obviously that his family is included in that. The way that Clovis Bray the First treated his relatives who worked with him at Bray Corporation is unconscionable. It's ridiculous the way he treated them. They were like, I've read some entries about his life and the life and times of Clovis Bray. He basically saw his family as employees and inferiors and just like lab assistants, more or less.
So, fun fact about that, like Clovis Bray the Second, his son, he is quoted saying, "Father didn't have employees or assistants, and for that matter, he didn't have heroes either. Every person living or lost was a collaborator, and that included his children."
Yeah.
And so this guy, he didn't give a shit about anybody, literally anybody besides himself. I mean, you wrote this little thing about maps too, with his drive, which I love. You wrote that he had a distaste of maps because they end.
Yeah, they have boundaries. Like, he didn't like boundaries.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good like example of just him right there.
And the way you put it, even his own son was only ever considered a collaborator and nothing more. It's like it comes back to that idea of your value to Clovis Bray only extends as far as what you can do for him, your utility to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that all factors into, we have to understand what drove this guy when he made his mark on the golden age, an age of wonders. Like, to be an extraordinary person during an extraordinary time, that's a tall order, but Clovis Bray did it. But what drove him to do all of that was he wanted to live forever. Other people, even his own family, were all just tools to him. Even the Traveler was just a tool to him to accomplish that.
Yeah.
So what a way to live. That's just crazy.
I can't fathom ever thinking like that. That just doesn't, that my brain doesn't function like that, as it should not function.
Yeah, you're healthy like then. That. You're okay.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, but stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey Lore Party listeners, my name's Abu and I'm a producer here on the network. I wanted to take a minute to tell you about Wind's Howling, our podcast all about the Witcher TV show on Netflix. I don't know about you, but I love listening to podcasts about my favorite TV shows. It's great to listen to other people who are just as excited about a show as I am. These podcasts give me new perspective and a greater appreciation for the show I already enjoy. So that's where Wind's Howling comes in. My co-host Brett and I love The Witcher, and we want Wind's Howling to be your companion podcast to the Netflix show. We'll be diving deep into every single episode of the TV show and exploring the larger context of the story from the games and novels. And don't worry, the podcast is accessible to both longtime Witcher fans and newcomers. You can find Wind's Howling on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everything in between. If you want to learn more, visit loreparty.com. I hope to see you on the path.
So we're going to get into, we've kind of brushed upon ethics stuff. We've brushed upon a couple of things like, okay, we get it. This guy's an asshole. He's a narcissist. He wants to live forever. Let's get into some specific ethics violations because really we are going, so in the game, we interact with Exo constantly. Some of our greatest friends are Exo in the game. They are very, very influential to us. And they're great. I love a bunch of Exos. I have an Exo character. I love it. But what brought us to this point? Beyond Light itself, this expansion, I think, is great because it touches upon a lot of stuff that we take for granted in the game almost. Like, for instance, like engrams and stuff like that. And it comes at a cost. It shows us what we take for granted. All of this great, amazing stuff. So the creation of Exos. We go to Braytech in this game, and it's really cool to see. I mean, it's super advanced. It's exactly what I would think a golden age, factory lab thing would look at. But as we're going through Braytech, we get a firsthand account. We do get a firsthand account from the stranger. So the Exo stranger from the first game, we meet this person again, and they explain everything. Turns out she is his granddaughter. And you're thinking, wait a minute, how does that work? His granddaughter was manipulated into being an experiment on. And that's the stranger's name is Elizabeth. And she tells us the story of how in her timeline, which has the same past as ours, it was bad. I mean, this guy manipulated his own family into being experimented on. And we see that the first iteration of Exos were that was a mess because
it was a rough draft.
Find out, oh God, it was so bad. The shit this guy did. So he couldn't truly clone somebody's consciousness. Mm-hmm. Essentially, he killed these people. Yeah. He just killed them because the consciousness that was in the first generation of Exos, it's very, I tie it to like the uncanny valley. Mm-hmm. They were almost to the exact molecule, brainwave, everything. They were a consciousness, but they actually weren't. It was like a projection of a consciousness. And it caused those who were first generation Exo to go absolutely bonkers, but also the people that saw it were, they had a lot of psychological effects of being exposed to them.
Sure. It's a rough thing to watch happen. Like if you're an employee at Braytech or just someone that the company propaganda worked on, like the marketing caught you and you fell for it and you thought, oh man, I can't wait to be a robot and, explore space and all that and live forever. And, you watch someone else get turned into an Exo and their new body rejects the copy of their old mind that was sent over. That's a bad situation to be in. Watching that happen, let alone having it happen to you. I mean, how do you walk away from that intact? And it's, we touched on before, like how Clovis experimented on his own family, and from his own granddaughter, Elizabeth, the Exo stranger, we hear a first-hand account.
There was one whose knowledge of the darkness exceeded even our own. My grandfather, Clovis Bray the First. Elizabeth, he said to me as I woke, born again as an Exo. You are going to save the world. What a load of crap. The old man didn't care about saving the world. He only cared about his precious legacy. Still, here's to hoping he was right. Clovis kept most of his secrets in his personal journal, and I know just where we can find it.
It's hard to have sympathy for a guy like Clovis Bray when we know that's what he put people through. And you kind of start to see the Exo characters in the game in a different light after that. You get an appreciation for what happened to them and what went into the creation of their species. It's jarring. It's disturbing.
I feel very bad for Cade because
oh my god, yeah. We'll need to come back and talk about Cade 6 one of these days.
God, I love him. Yeah. You know, breaking all these boundaries and safety, common sense stuff, and the guy made a Vex gate. The guy built a fucking Vex gate. Like, I'm just gonna throw that out there now.
How do you justify something like that? That's over the line for sure.
He listens willingly to like the darkness. Like the darkness is like, you know, whispering in his ear, and he's like, yeah, okay, cool, sure, I'm gonna use you too. Like that's how
everything that
it.
You and I consider bad ideas, such as building a Vex gate and listening to the darkness, everything that normal people think like, oh, that's not worth the risk. All those things were just polite suggestions to Clovis Bray. A guy like that thinks, you know, there's something we said for, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but this guy was ridiculous about it. Like nothing mattered. Working with the like literal entity of cosmic evil, like taking advice from that was like, oh hey, whatever gets me closer to living forever, right? Like I don't care, it's all good. Like it's all just a tool. We've touched on that before. Like everything is just a means to an end for Bray.
He's like he's literally the manifestation of like narcissism in this universe. And when I think of like the Exo, for instance, do you think now that looking at all of them, can you divorce like the motivation from the result?
It's hard. It really is. Like, that's a great question, though. Like, you look at the people in the Destiny game who are Exo, and they have these vibrant personalities, like Cade 6, of course, but there's also, you know, Lakshmi and Saint 14, and so many great, memorable Exo characters who have their own, you know, hopes and dreams and passions and motivations.
Yeah.
They are people in every sense of the word. They are like sentient beings. And, you know, I look at all that and I think, I'm so glad these people exist. I'm glad that they are in this world and they are part of this world that I inhabit with them. But yeah, as you pointed out, if you really think about it, like, God, would it have been better if they had just never been made? Like, there would maybe be less net suffering if Clovis Bray never created the Exo. It's a weird balancing act to think about.
Yeah.
Was it worth it? That's the real question.
It's so yeah.
There's no real easy answer to that. Because, yeah, like we've touched on, you know, this fine line between genius and sociopath that Clovis Bray sort of straddled. And, you know, you think about, can we really expect such a pioneering genius to fit into our contemporary conceptions of morality? And also, as you pointed out, we still benefit from his inventions. So was it a net positive that he had the influence that he had? We can detest Bray as a person. We can personally think this guy was a total dick, would not have a beer with him, would not hang out with him, 0 out of 10.
No
but does that lessen the importance of his accomplishments? It's like, can you separate the man from the accomplishments? That's the thing. It's like, yeah, I think it all just boils down to these are all things you need to be aware of. It comes back to that concept of a complicated legacy. It's not black or white.
And that's the thing, like, yeah, like, is he successful? Like, I put that in air quotes, because it's like, what can you define as successful? Like, his achievements, but what about his, like, terrible things he did? Like, there's so much more into these, can you define success? Can you define, like, this guy was one complicated dude.
The way I would put it, you can make a mark on history and still be a failure as a human being, I think.
Yes. Oh,
That's
yeah.
how I put it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there was one last thing that Clovis Bray did that we do need to touch on before we wrap up here, is just sort of a final twist in character, maybe. To me, this indicates that maybe he grew a little bit as a person, which I wouldn't think is possible, everything else we know about him having been said. But there, you know, we've touched on the early versions of Exo as they're being invented and perfected. Well, perfected is a loose term, but as they're being developed and, people are transferring their minds into exo bodies. Enhanced, yeah. There's that idea of rebooting their minds so that they don't go crazy. Clovis Bray, after he became Exo...
He became Clovis 1.
Yes, yeah. He became Clovis 1, and that sort of started the trend of Exo people, updating their names with the numbers, and that number signifies how many times their mind has been rebooted. So he eventually was Clovis 43 toward the end of his life as Clovis.
This guy, he fought the Vex invasions. He did a lot of stuff as an Exo. And so I actually titled this in our script. I titled this The Banshee Dilemma. Because after he was Clovis 43, he willingly rebooted himself and went by Banshee 44. And Banshee 44 is one of our great buddies in the tower who sells us weapons. And he's a badass too, but I remember when the game first came out, we did not know who he was. Everybody just thought Banshee 44, he's been rebooted 44 times. What a loser. I remember everybody just making fun of this dude, being like, wow, he must really suck. Because the other thing is they reboot when they, quote unquote, die. If they die, they can just get rebooted and then they're back.
Yeah.
This guy willingly rebooted himself and changed his name. And I remember talking to you about this the other day. Where's the narcissism?
Yeah, where did it go all of a sudden?
Where's the narcissism? I am so confused. What happened?
It's funny. It's fun to think about. It's very interesting. Everything we know about Clovis Bray indicates that his obsession with immortality, that speaks to this problem he had where he couldn't imagine the universe without him in it. That's classic narcissism. Everything revolves around you. I have to live forever because without me, nothing else is real, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you get into, Clovis 43 willingly just sort of wiping his mind and taking on a new identity as Banshee 44. He's no longer Clovis Bray at all. There's nothing left of Clovis Bray there. And it's how would a malignant narcissist and sociopath like Clovis Bray allow something like that? To me, that, just sort of personal theory, a little bit of speculation here. Maybe after everything he'd done, after all the people he had both hurt and helped along the way, maybe he somehow had some glimmer of realization there that not everything is about him. Maybe there is more to life than just bending the universe to your will and, living forever and, being a big shot. Maybe he can be someone else, someone who's not as important. Maybe he can just be a bystander in the universe and not the center of it. And so that allowed him to maybe let go and become Banshee. Who knows?
Yeah. But the other thing is, I think also just being around for that long and seeing all the things he's done, I think maybe also seeing his inventions cause so much chaos, and maybe it opened his eyes as well, just being around for so long. I want to know what it is that he experienced that changed the game for him, if you will. But I think also the funny thing is when we meet the Zordon head version of him, I mean, bro, it's night and day. I know they meet, Banshee's okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to go confront myself, basically, which I think is super cool. But also, you can tell, he even says his giant Zordon head version says he's disappointed, basically, in his Exo body form. He's what the hell is this shit? And it really shows the night and day difference between 44 reboots and a dormant for hundreds of years head. So yeah, to me, I think there's so much more story that can be told there, that even with cutscenes. Please give me cutscenes, Bungie, more cutscenes, please.
Yeah,
please,
really.
please.
Seriously, more cutscenes.
It's really, because this shit is good, man. This is really getting good, and I found all this fascinating. So yeah, I think that there's again, the Banshee dilemma. What is it? What happened? What made this guy completely do a 180?
There are a lot of possible answers and a lot of rabbit holes that those answers could take you down, for sure. Well, that about wraps it up. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us grow the show. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at lore_party. And check out our YouTube page for bonus videos and highlights. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.